She stilled when the human spoke her name. No one had ever remembered it before. The galaxy was vast and cold, stretching far beyond where most species could imagine. Civilizations rose and fell, stars were born and died, and entire worlds changed hands without a whisper of complaint. In this great expanse, efficiency was everything. Power mattered more than personality, and survival depended on knowing your place. Names, for most, were a luxury. They were for poets and historians, not for those who served the machines of the galaxy. She belonged to one of those forgotten species. Long ago, her people had thrived on a small, green planet at the edge of the Compact's territory. They were clever, kind, and curious, but they were also fragile, too easily overlooked. When the Galactic Compact expanded, her people were absorbed, their culture quietly erased from official records. Their language became extinct in public, their stories locked away in dusty archives that no one ever visited. Names were replaced with numbers. Identities were replaced with roles. She herself had a designation code, a string of letters and numbers no one remembered and no one cared to say aloud. Her station was massive, a city in the sky, hovering over a neutral planet. It served as a hub for diplomats, traders, and bureaucrats from hundreds of worlds. Every hallway echoed with the clatter of footsteps and the hum of engines. Her life was routine. She handled reports, delivered messages, and translated documents. She spoke little. She was expected to speak little. She followed the rules, and she survived. Humans had arrived only a few decades ago. They were newcomers to galactic politics, slow to trust and slow to learn. Most species underestimated them. Humans were average in every measurable way. They were weak compared to the muscle-bound warriors of Orvar Prime. They were slow to calculate like the Cephirians, whose minds could solve impossible equations in milliseconds. They had no fleets of advanced ships or powerful weapons. Yet, humans had a strange kind of persistence. They asked questions others considered unnecessary. They remembered things others had long forgotten. It was during one such human visit that her world began to change. The briefing room was enormous. Holographic displays floated above polished floors. Ambassadors and envoys sat around the central table, each representing their worlds, each observing with careful neutrality. She had arranged the reports and prepared the documents, her fingers moving swiftly over the panels, making sure every detail was correct. She had done this hundreds of times before. Nothing unusual would happen today. That was what she told herself. The human representative stood near the front, a tall man with dark hair and a calm expression. His eyes, however, were sharp and alert. He scanned the room, not just the screens or the documents, but the people themselves. When he reached her, he paused. Something in his gaze made her chest tighten. She looked down, instinctively feeling exposed, though she knew no one else had noticed. Then he spoke. At first, she thought she had misheard. The word was soft, careful, yet it carried an unexpected weight. It was her name, her true name. Not the designation she had carried all her life, not the code she had been trained to respond to. No one had ever spoken it aloud for centuries. Not even her family, not even her teachers. It was a name lost to time, a spark buried beneath layers of erasure. She froze. Her fingers stopped moving. Her breath caught in her chest. Time itself seemed to stall. Around her, the room carried on as usual, but she could not hear it. Only that one word existed, echoing in her mind. It was impossible. How could anyone know? How could anyone remember what the galaxy had chosen to forget? The human repeated it gently, as if testing the sound. Each syllable struck her like a memory she had not dared to keep. Faces blurred around her. Names on the table, stars on the displays, reports in her hands, all faded into insignificance. She was someone else now. She was herself again. Her species had long learned that memory was dangerous. To remember was to hope, and hope could be punished. Their people had survived by forgetting, by becoming numbers and roles. They had learned to hide behind designations. Yet here was a human standing boldly, speaking a name that should not exist. A whisper ran through her mind, "I am real, I am remembered." She looked up, finally meeting the human's eyes. There was no mockery there, no curiosity that sought to exploit her, only respect and an unspoken understanding. He was telling her, "You matter." The room fell silent around them. Others noticed only the pause, the sudden stillness, but they did not understand its meaning. Officials exchanged glances. A few envoys frowned. Human audacity was known, but this was unusual. How had he learned such a thing? The human smiled faintly, unbothered by the questioning looks. He explained calmly, almost shyly. His voice was steady, carrying across the polished hall. "History is not just about victories or rulers," he said. "It is about the people who lived, who dreamed, who created. Sometimes the smallest voices are the most important. Your name, I found it in fragments, in songs and old writings no one else cared for. I remembered it. I wanted you to hear it again." How could anyone piece together centuries of erased history from bits and pieces? And yet she could not deny the truth of the sound. Her name was real. It belonged to her. The human's words had done more than awaken a memory. They stirred something deeper, a feeling she had never allowed herself to feel: pride, identity, courage. Something wild and dangerous, something that might never be forgiven if discovered. Yet it was hers, and it was undeniable. She looked around at the officials, at the other delegates. They did not notice. They were not supposed to. They had been trained to see her as nothing more than a worker, a tool, a cog in the vast machinery of the compact. But the human had seen her. He had seen her. For a moment, she imagined what it would be like if others remembered too. If species erased from history could speak again, if their names were said aloud, if their songs were sung. The thought was intoxicating, frightening, and exhilarating all at once. She swallowed, trying to gather her composure. Her hands shook slightly as she returned to her work, though she no longer cared whether anyone watched. She had been small, silent, forgotten. Now she felt a spark within herself, a flame the galaxy had not extinguished. The human continued with the briefing, discussing trade agreements and treaties, but she hardly heard him. His presence, his act of remembering, had changed something fundamental. She understood that the galaxy, with all its order and efficiency, feared not weapons or fleets but memory. Humans, she realized, carried a different kind of power, the power to remember what others had chosen to erase. Her thoughts raced. Could she trust him? Could she risk believing in something so dangerous? Yet the warmth of her name on his lips, the weight of recognition, gave her strength. She felt more alive than she had in decades, more human than she had ever allowed herself to be. After the meeting, she lingered in the hallway. Other officials hurried past, too busy to notice her pause. The station's lights reflected in the polished floors, mirroring the glittering stars outside. She touched the small badge at her chest, the code she had always answered to, and felt it was no longer hers. Her name belonged to her, not to the compact, not to anyone else. She whispered it once softly, afraid of the sound, yet unable to resist. The name filled her mouth, her mind, her heart, and she realized with a mix of fear and hope that she would never be the same again. Somewhere in the distance, the human looked back. He smiled again, a quiet, knowing smile, as if he understood everything she could not yet say. And in that smile, she saw the possibility of a future where being remembered mattered more than being efficient, where names carried weight, where forgotten beings could rise again. The galaxy continued to hum around her, indifferent and enormous, but she was no longer indifferent to it. She had been small and unnoticed. Now she had a name, and with it she had a reason to act, a reason to remember, and perhaps, one day, a reason to fight for all who had been forgotten. And somewhere deep inside she whispered to herself, "Thank you." For the first time in centuries, she felt truly alive. The station hummed with quiet efficiency, but for her, nothing was quiet anymore. Her mind raced with the echo of her name. She kept repeating it softly under her breath, letting the sound sink into her bones. Every syllable felt like a key unlocking memories she had been forced to forget. Memories of her childhood, of her family, of songs and festivals long erased. The human had returned to his quarters after the briefing, but she could not stop thinking about him. How had he found it? How had he remembered something no one else even knew existed? Every question seemed impossible, yet the truth pressed against her like a physical weight. Her thoughts were interrupted by a gentle tap on the door. She turned, startled, and saw the human standing there, a small datapad in his hand. He smiled, the same calm and patient smile that had unnerved her before. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," he said softly. "I just wanted to show you something." The room was small, sterile, and quiet, but he seemed to carry a different energy with him. The human set the datapad on the table and activated it. Images and fragments of text appeared, delicate and faded. "These are pieces of your history," he explained. "I found them scattered in archives, almost forgotten. Songs, poems, records of your people's festivals, and your name, of course. I pieced them together as best I could." "Why do you care?" There was truth in his words. Something deep inside her stirred. For centuries, she had been trained to believe that being forgotten was survival, but now she felt the thrill of recognition and it scared her. "Do you know what it means?" she whispered, almost to herself. "No one has remembered my people for generations. No one has spoken our language. No one has sung our songs." A song her mother used to hum while tending the gardens. Faces, voices, laughter, all hidden behind years of erasure. And now the human had brought it back. The weight of centuries pressed on her chest. She realized that survival had come at a cost, the loss of identity, the loss of self. And yet here it was, handed back to her by someone who had no reason to care, except that he did. "Others might not understand," she said finally, her voice trembling. "If anyone finds out." She had always believed that power came from obedience, from silence, from blending into the machinery of the galaxy. But perhaps true power came from memory, from identity, from refusing to be erased. Over the following days, she found herself watching the human more closely. He moved through the station, quiet but observant, talking to others not as numbers, not as designations, but as individuals. He asked questions that seemed unnecessary at first, about family, about culture, about forgotten history. Yet each question revealed something the galaxy had overlooked. Slowly, others began to notice. Forgotten beings, species whose names had been lost, whose languages had disappeared from the public record, began to approach the human delegation. Not for power, not for favors, but to ask questions about their pasts. They wanted to hear their own names again, to reclaim a piece of themselves. The compact officials noticed too. They frowned, whispered among themselves, and convened emergency meetings. "This is dangerous," one advisor said. "Humans are stirring memories we cannot control. If individuals begin to remember their histories, our order is at risk." Her heart pounded as she realized that what the human had done for her could ripple across the entire station, perhaps even across the galaxy. Forgotten species might reclaim their identities. Numbers could become names. Roles could become stories. The entire structure of control could be challenged, not by fleets or weapons, but by remembrance. Despite the fear, she felt an unfamiliar surge of hope. The human had reminded her that identity was more than survival. It was defiance, it was strength, and it was freedom. One evening, as she worked late in her office, she found a small group gathered outside. They were quiet, nervous, hesitant. She recognized some of them, individuals she had seen for years, always in the background, always silent. Now they looked at her with curiosity and something else, trust. "They told us, you know," one whispered. "You remember. Your names are real." Not to challenge the compact, not yet, but to remind themselves that they existed. Songs were hummed in corridors. Stories were whispered in offices. Faces lit up with the joy of being recognized. The compact officials grew uneasy. Meetings were held. Humans were warned. The idea that memory could be a form of power was foreign to them. They could control fleets, impose laws, and rewrite treaties, but they could not control remembrance. They did not understand that the simple act of saying a name aloud could change everything. She watched the unrest grow with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. The human had awakened something that could not be undone. He had shown her that being remembered was a form of rebellion, and that rebellion could inspire courage in the most unlikely places. In her own office, she stood and gazed out at the stars. The station floated above a quiet planet, bathed in the light of distant suns. She thought of her people, her childhood, her lost songs. She whispered her name aloud once more, savoring the sound, and felt it ripple through her being like a wave of power she had never known. The human's act of remembering had sparked a chain reaction. She was no longer just a worker, a code, a number. She was herself again. And for the first time, she understood that identity could be as dangerous as it was liberating. Somewhere in the distance, the human passed by, unaware of the quiet revolution he had begun. He moved with his calm, patient manner, asking questions, listening, remembering. And each time he spoke to someone forgot, he carried the spark of hope, the reminder that no one is truly erased as long as someone, somewhere, remembers. She smiled faintly, a spark of determination in her eyes. The path ahead would not be easy. The compact would resist. They would try to suppress this awakening, to stamp out the memory of forgotten species. But she knew now that the human's lesson was clear. Remembrance could not be controlled. It could not be erased. Once a name was remembered, once a story was told, it could never truly be lost. Her fingers lingered on the datapad, tracing the fragments of her history. Each piece was a treasure, each word a small victory against erasure. And she realized that the human had given her more than a name. He had given her courage. He had given her hope. He had given her the knowledge that she was not alone, and that being remembered could change the galaxy. And as she whispered her name one final time that evening, she knew that something had shifted. The forgotten were beginning to remember. The silent were beginning to speak. And the galaxy, vast and cold as it was, would never be the same again. For the first time in centuries, she felt something stronger than fear. She felt purpose. And she understood that the human who had spoken her name had done more than awaken memories. He had awakened a revolution of remembrance, a quiet, unstoppable force that would spread far beyond their station, far beyond the stars. The change did not stay hidden for long. The Galactic Compact was built on order. Every species had a place, every being had a role, and every role had a number. When that order began to shift, even slightly, the system noticed. Reports started to arrive at higher levels of administration. Small things at first, unusual behavior, forgotten workers requesting access to old archives, low-level staff asking about cultural records that were supposed to be sealed forever. She felt it before anyone said a word to her. The station felt different. Conversations stopped when officials passed by. Security drones hovered longer than usual. Messages were delayed. Doors took an extra second to open. These were signs she had learned to recognize over years of quiet survival. The compact was watching. One cycle later, the order arrived. She was summoned to a closed council session. The message was short and formal. No explanation, no choice. Her designation code was listed instead of her name. That alone made her chest tighten. She stood slowly from her desk, smoothing her uniform, her hands steady despite the storm inside her. She whispered her name once under her breath, grounding herself, and then walked toward the council chamber. The room was cold and bright. Tall figures from many species sat in a wide circle. Their faces were unreadable, their eyes sharp. At the center stood a single empty platform. She knew this place well. Decisions made here shaped the lives of billions. A senior official spoke first. "You have been associated with unusual activity," the official said. "Cultural disturbances, historical inquiries, unauthorized conversations. The human delegation is at the center of this disruption," another voice added. "And you are connected to them." That he spread destabilizing information. "And if I refuse?" she asked, surprising even herself with the steadiness of her voice. The room grew colder. "Refusal will be noted," the official said. "Consequences will follow." Now the galaxy was asking her to do it again. She found the human later that day in a quiet observation corridor. Stars drifted slowly beyond the glass, distant and indifferent. He turned when he sensed her presence, concern flashing across his face. "They're moving against you," she said softly. "Against all of this." "I expected it." The human finally spoke. "Whatever you choose, it must be your choice. Memory only matters if it is freely held." She thought of the safety of silence and the cost of obedience. By morning, she had made her decision. The council chamber was full when she returned, more full than usual. Representatives from many systems watched closely. The human delegation sat at the edge, calm but alert. She stood on the platform alone. "State your designation," the senior official demanded. She inhaled slowly. "My designation is obsolete," she said. "My name is—" He shared memory, not weapons. He did not destabilize this station. He reminded us of who we are. About the quiet change spreading through the station. She spoke calmly, clearly, and without anger. She did not accuse. She did not threaten. She remembered. The chamber erupted into argument. Some officials demanded sanctions. Others hesitated. Representatives from forgotten species shifted uneasily, something awakening in their eyes. Then something unexpected happened. One delegate stood. "My species was erased 2 centuries ago," the delegate said. "We were reduced to labor units, but the humans spoke our ancient greeting. I had not heard it since my grandmother died." The council struggled to regain control, but the moment had passed. The truth was visible now. Memory had spread too far, too deep. The human finally spoke. "We do not seek power," he said. "We seek acknowledgement. The galaxy is strong, but it is incomplete when it forgets parts of itself." But it could not erase what had already been remembered. Too many names had been spoken. Too many stories had resurfaced. After the session, no verdict was announced. She walked out of the chamber unsure of her future, but certain of one thing: she had chosen herself. In the corridors, forgotten beings looked at her differently now. Not with fear, with respect. The human approached her quietly. "You were brave," he said. She shook her head. "I was honest." She placed a hand over her chest, feeling the steady beat of her heart, and whispered her name once more. Not in secret, not in fear, but in defiance. The council did not announce a punishment. That alone was shocking. For cycles after the hearing, the Galactic Compact remained silent. No official statement was released. No orders were sent. No sanctions were declared against the human delegation or against her. The station continued to function, but beneath the surface, everything had changed. She returned to her duties, but nothing felt the same. Officials who once ignored her now hesitated when she passed. Some avoided her. Others watched her with careful eyes. Her designation still appeared in the system, but many now knew her name, even if they did not dare speak it aloud. The human remained calm through it all. He continued his work as he always had, listening, recording, remembering. But now he was no longer alone. Representatives from forgotten species began to visit him openly. Not in secret, not in fear, but with quiet courage. They brought fragments of their histories, old phrases, half-remembered songs, broken stories passed down in whispers, and the humans listened. They did not judge which histories were important. They did not rank cultures by strength or influence. They recorded everything with the same care. To them, a forgotten farmer's song mattered as much as an emperor's decree. She watched this happen from a distance at first, afraid to hope too much. The compact had not acted yet, but she knew it was only a matter of time. Order did not surrender easily. Then the announcement came. A full assembly was called, not a closed council, not a quiet meeting, a public one. Representatives from across the compact were required to attend. The hall was filled beyond capacity. She stood beside the human delegation, her hands steady, her heart loud in her chest. The air felt heavy, charged with expectation. The senior compact official rose slowly and addressed the assembly. "The Galactic Compact was built to preserve stability," the official said, "but stability must not become stagnation. That identity was a weakness. That memory created division." Stories recovered from fragments and whispers. Forgotten species stood taller as their histories appeared before them, visible to all. This archive will not rewrite law, the official said. It will not grant political power, but it will restore acknowledgement. Names will be recorded. Cultures will be preserved. Memory will no longer be treated as a threat. Memory did not weaken unity. Suppression did. Forgotten beings were not loyal because they were silent. They were silent because they were afraid, and fear was unstable. Over the following cycles, the change spread. Archives once sealed were opened. Humans worked alongside compact historians, carefully reconstructing lost histories. Forgotten species were invited, not forced, to contribute what they remembered. Participation was voluntary. Memory, the humans insisted, could not be commanded. She became a liaison for the living archive. For the first time in her long life, she worked not as a function but as a bridge. She helped others find their names, their stories, their voices. She listened as elders wept upon hearing songs they thought gone forever. She watched young ones speak names they had never been taught. The galaxy did not fall into chaos. It changed. Conflicts did not increase. They lessened. Species that felt seen no longer needed to resist quietly. Understanding replaced resentment. Identity became a foundation, not a fault line. Humanity's reputation transformed. They were no longer underestimated newcomers, nor were they feared conquerors. They were known by a new title spoken with a mix of respect and unease, the Rememberers. Humans did not rule systems. They did not demand tribute. They did something far more unsettling. They refused to forget. She stood one evening on the observation deck watching stars drift past in slow silence. The human joined her, hands resting on the railing. "You changed everything," she said quietly. He shook his head. "No, you did." Of the single moment when a human spoke her name and gave her back herself. That moment had spread outward like a ripple through space. "Do you think it will last?" she asked. He looked out at the stars. "Memory always does, empires don't." In time, children across the compact learned about forgotten species. They learned names alongside numbers, stories alongside statistics. The galaxy became richer, not weaker. She no longer whispered her name in secret. She spoke it freely. And every time she did, she remembered the truth humanity had taught the stars. It is found in what you choose to remember.